second that.
Until 4:30, max. You all right with that?
Yep.
I'll move that if someone would second that. Thank you, Councillor Simpson. So, moving on to the final large item, as if there weren't enough for one day, we now deal with the thorny issue of dealing with our huge growth, our need to expand and keep up with the provision of sports facilities, and just how we're going to do this. So I know there's a presentation to start this off. Over to you. Not too sure who's going to introduce this team.
Kia ora. I think Nancy's going to quickly walk you through the presentation and then we can respond to questions.
So I've got 3 slides to step you through the recommendations. The first slide just to show you that this is the last report before we draft the sport facility investment plan. The previous decisions you've made set out the outcomes for sport facility investment and the mechanisms to deliver and measure the outcomes. This report looks at the current revenue streams to deliver those outcomes. The next slide sets out the current state and the likely future funding challenges. We've got a population that's growing and constantly changing. We've got facilities that are aging. We have evidence showing that in some areas we're already experiencing supply shortage and funding gaps. Indoor courts, for example, our evidence shows we'll have a gap of 21 courts by 2021, and the cost per court is estimated to be $5 million. So that's another $100 million we have to raise in 4 years to cater for demand. The gap is likely to widen to 42 courts by 2031, and the cost per court is likely to increase. The courts are mainly played by our young people, 5 to 15 years old, for popular sports such as netball, futsal, badminton, volleyball, and gymnastics, and basketball. The other challenge I would like to note is that any funding for sport facilities is likely to have to compete with other strategic priorities such as transport and housing. The pie charts at the end, at the bottom of the slide, just to show you that currently we rely quite heavily on rates and development contributions, and the 2 revenue sources are likely to be insufficient to cater for future demand. Also, development contributions are unstable and have legal constraints on how the fund can be spent. So the last slide just set out the 3 options that are considered in the report. The first option is to maintain the status quo and reprioritize. So the advantage of this option is that there's going to be no immediate impact, no disruption to the current system, but it's unlikely to provide enough revenue for the future. And this might mean a decrease in overall provision and quality of sport facilities. And in the long run, this might lead to a decrease in participation and community outcomes. Option 2 is to increase the amount from rates and development contribution. So this option will raise more revenue compared to option 1, but still likely to be insufficient given that we put a 2.5% growth cap on rates. There is potential to increase development contributions in the next LTP. But like I said before, development contributions are unstable and have legal constraints. Option 3 is to expand revenue streams for sport facility investment by having new user fees and charges, rent revenue from community leases, new targeted rates and revenue from commercial activities at council properties. This is our recommended option, not just because it's going to raise more revenue compared to option 1 and 2, but also it's going to provide council a more diverse and flexible range of revenue to cater for future demand. We seek your in-principle approval of option 3 and to include the 4 new revenue streams in the draft sport facilities investment plan for public consultation. A key part of the consultation will be to gather feedback on the impact of option 3 on young family players, sports clubs, and the community. We will develop detailed policy for each of the new revenue streams, and the key part of that will be to balance the increased revenue with affordability issues, with participation and community outcomes. So the main objective of this report is to help council raise sufficient revenue for the future to provide more and better sports facilities to deliver good outcomes for Auckland, and it shouldn't be in the expense of making the facilities so expensive that our families can't afford to use them. That's the end of my presentation.
Okay, thank you. Just before we go to questions, I've just got a recommended slight change to the recommendation, which we can pop up, and it changes it slightly, but I think might deal with some of the issues that people have raised with me. So it's the introductory bit that we agree to consult on expansion of the current revenue streams to increase funding, etc. So we're agreeing to consult on the expansion of the increased revenue streams. It's a subtle change. It still says we need to address this as an issue, but we're going to come out and talk to you about it. So that may resolve just some of the concerns that have been raised.
Madam Chair, I'm happy to move if it speeds things up.
Happy, yep. Sorry, I've forgotten my words there. Councillor Fletcher, that'd be lovely, thank you.
Good.
You can move that. I'm happy to second those. So you might like to reserve your ability to speak to that. And we've got a question from Councillor Clow of the phone.
No question. I was actually going to make a similar amendment to the start, but I was also going to make an amendment to C, which would put the letters LTP between board and consultation. Because, and I'm happy to speak to my rationale for that going to the LTP, because I think it is an item of significance. C to put in after local board, to put LTP consultation.
Yep, that makes sense.
Yep.
I don't have any problem with that. Okay,
I'm happy to.
yes,
I don't have any questions, but I'm happy to speak. Is it?
okay.
But just
Happy for you not to speak. Shall we just go through the other list, and if you still feel the need to speak, that'd be great. I hasten to add, at this time of day, I'm very happy for people not to speak. Councillor, so I've got Councillor Casey.
It's just a
Councillor
question
Watson
about
and
the
Councillor
range of commercial activities that currently take place in our sporting facilities. In the report, you mentioned 4, sports tournaments, bars, restaurants and cafes. Of those, which is the biggest earner, and what other ones don't we know about?
I would think the answer would be cafes and bar facilities.
Say again?
The cafes and the bar facilities and the sports clubs would, I think, be the biggest earner.
Okay. And anything more than that?
We should look at gaming as well. That would
So
be
you mean gambling?
Yes,
Pokies?
correct.
Excellent. Could you just say a bit more about that?
I don't have the data to say how much it is, but there would be a revenue source for some sports clubs.
Excellent. Thank you.
And that's something that we are picking up under
That will
the
be
review of the
addressed through
occupancy
this
guidelines.
resolution?
Yeah. So the
Just a
question-
reminder also that we had agreed at the last committee meeting to get more data on how many bars and gambling things are going on through our review of the community occupancy guidelines and leases. That will be one source of us understanding how many of these things go on, and then we'll be able to hopefully identify the revenue that people are getting from that as well.
Just through you, Madam Chair, if I can just add to that, I think some of the other activities are things like commercial coaching activities for sport and recreation, but they're aligned beyond what would be community sport and very much into the personal trainer activity or gyms or coaching. So those sorts of activities are being undertaken as well.
Particularly for tennis.
Tennis would be one example.
Okay. Councillor Watson.
Thank you. Two questions. One that goes to the comment about the constraints of development contributions. I was under the impression that on any dwelling, we levy so much for acquisition, so if we're talking about sports fields, and then so much more for developing that sport field. Are you saying that we don't have the ability to adjust that upward considerably or significantly? By just increasing the amount that we levy, is that possible?
Through the chair, really, the issue with development contributions is more how we use them, where we use them, and what we use them for. So council was constrained. We can only use those for capital expenditure. They can only be used in areas of growth where we see that a lot of the demand for our sports facilities is in actual brownfield areas, and we cannot use them for community facilities, which would include indoor courts, swimming pools, so that we only really use them for sports fields. So that's the main constraint. When it comes to the actual quantum generated through development contributions, there is a cap that's built in, but we're well within that cap at the moment, and I think there'll be a discussion in the LTP as to whether council wants to increase the quantum generated from development contributions.
Okay, so in an area like Highbury, which has been intensified under the unitary plan, there's going to be a lot more development going in there. There's sports field just down the road, Birkenhead War Memorial, and a whole lot of other community facilities. Are you saying that could only be used in improving the sports fields, but nothing else, not the swimming pool, not the basketball court, not the next things?
Not those things. I suppose the only caveat I would say is that if it is a growth area, then it would be invested in the sports fields there. So whereas we see the majority of the demand, particularly for indoor courts, is in the central city area, and we would not be able to use development contributions to respond to that significant gap in supply.
Okay, a practical question that goes to point 47, which identifies facilities that are mainly sport participants. These might include boat ramps, sports fields, and floodlights. Am I correct in assuming that we would be charging teams then something for if they're having their practice at night and the floodlights are turned on? Is that the sort of thing we're talking about?
That is the thing that we're talking about, and in some respects that's a way to manage demand for that. So we see that we have a number of sports clubs that will book practice facilities, including floodlights, and then they won't use them. So there's an added benefit from having that user charge in terms of rationing excessive demand that isn't actualised by those sports clubs. But no, that's exactly what we're talking about, investigating further.
Okay, so I don't know if this is appropriate time, Madam Chair, or not, but straight away the alarm bell's starting to go off a bit in my head when I think of all the codes from young teams to the adults who train twice a week generally, who are now maybe going to have to start stumping up for floodlights, and in some cases floodlights that will have been put up by the club or on grounds that the club may at some point have been the ones who developed. So right across Auckland there's all manner of anomalies as to how much has been invested in any given venue, and quite often it is the club that has provided that. So, and these people will remember these things, so I just wonder how we handle that.
Councillor, that's why we're consulting on it, because that's exactly the opportunity to say, are these the complexities that haven't been thought of? How do they impact? Let's actually understand it.
I guess all I'm saying is there's a whole lot of complexities that occur to me before we go out to consultation.
And through the chair, what we'd be looking at is recovering the costs of the electricity to provide those floodlights, not necessarily the structures themselves.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. Councillor Walker.
Sure. Just picking up on the issue around the contributions, and I understand how the existing contributions regime works. It's less than $7,000 per property, which on a $700,000 property equates to about 1%. Now, given the contrast with the Reserves Act 77, which was 7.5% versus 1% now, what prospect is there moving back to a regime like that, specifically for reserves and the things on those reserves?
Through the chair, I think recommendation B notes that there is the potential to look at development contributions during the long-term planning process. So that's something that council is going to investigate and look at.
Okay. Well, I just make the point, Madam Chair, that that is a fundamental structural change that should not be just a potential, it should be a must, because the difference between 7.5% and 1% is phenomenal and is basically the financial deficit that's putting us in the hole that we're in now. And what we're doing is we're putting all the clubs in the same hole because we're digging that hole. So I just want to put that on the table. The other thing that concerns me, Madam Chair, is there has been a community facilities review, and my understanding that the purpose of that review was to examine the facilities that clubs were providing, to look at the equities where clubs were providing conceivably the building, conceivably had even financed the grounds versus clubs that weren't, ownership situations, non-ownership situations, quite a number of things, so that we had the baseline data first before we did this. So my question goes to, how are we getting on with that community facilities review, and when is that information going to be available? It's been a few years now.
Through the chair, I'm not sure the review that's been spoken of, so that's something I might have to go away and investigate and come back to you.
Well, through you, Madam Chair, I've been on, this is my third term now, so I'm pretty familiar with the process that we've been engaging with, and I have constantly been raising the necessity to complete that work so that we knew what the situation was. Otherwise, you can have severe inequity amongst groups, amongst codes across Auckland, which we already have now. So that review is imperative, and I would suggest that it is a necessity to complete that before we get into this situation, because as Councillor Watson points out, it is a huge can of worms. The other point that I make is, in this process, what value are we going to be putting on what these clubs, and conceivably, I don't doubt that we're going to be looking at arts facilities and everything across the board. It's not just sports. There are all sorts of operations that are on council property. What value are we going to be putting on what they are providing through voluntary help, through donation, through all sorts of things, relative to what we might have to provide if we picked up and did that? So are we going to be looking at that?
Through the chair, so one piece of work that that the committee approved earlier on in the year was to develop that CABX tool, which is would provide us with the data to measure the outcomes that are being delivered by individual leases. So that piece of work will allow us to answer that particular question.
They're my questions. Thank you.
Yep. Oh, thank you, Councillor. So LTP is the time for us to look at development contributions, but you'll remember that there was a huge push to reduce development contributions to keep housing affordable. So this is the constant, you know, drive housing affordability, reduce developer contributions, and
Well, that's a myth, Madam Chair.
Yeah, I know, but that was certainly the thinking of the council at the time. So, Member Wilcox.
Oh, yeah. I can tell you the answer to this consultation now. Who's the fool that's going to say, yes, charge me more? So, you know, I'm just trying to work out here, you know, if we don't have some kind of options for people to kind of say, well, this is the worst of the bad bunch, people are just going to go, well, yeah, charge them, but not me. I mean, I can see that right now in this. So, I mean, do we have a range of options that's going to, you know, kind of give people a chance to say, well, this is the worst of the bad bunch, or can we change this, or are we expecting them to come up with the answers to what's the best option? Because I can tell you, I wouldn't be, if I saw that coming to me, I'd just say straight away, no, I'm not voting for this. I'm not even going to say yes.
So through the chair, so we can present in a community usable way the range of options you have been presented today, so they can actually express our preferred option on that. We can do that through the draft investment plan. I suppose one of the things maybe we need to make clearer is that many things that you individually or local boards are being asked about, such as indoor courts and all sorts of things, we're saying to you, DCs don't fund those. So you can either look at other mechanisms for funding, or you will be left with rates, or you will be left with not being able to contribute to that at all. So, and those are some of the implications we can make very clear to the public, wherein either we're not supporting any types of sport facility or participation where we can't use DCs, or we're funding it through rates, or we're going to have a look at a wider range of funding tools. So that's what this paper is about, and we can make that very clear in the public consultation document, as well as including the other options for the public to give their views on.
And through the chair, I guess when it comes to user fees and charges, there are a number of sports that already pay user fees and charges, so anything to do with indoor courts. If you're a swimmer in a competitive environment, you're paying entry to the pool. If you're paying hockey or netball, you're paying user fees or charges that go through the sports organisation. So, and this was something that we initially raised when we consulted on the discussion document to develop the plan. We got a really clear message that the public and the sports sector were concerned about that inequity, and they suggested that it was something we needed to look at. So we'll present that back and get some more feedback on it.
Just one other question here. So we're talking about generating revenue from commercial activities. Are we talking things like, you know, the McDonald's Long Bay Regional Park, or Coca-Cola Tapapakanga, or things like that? I mean, we're talking about here in this type of stuff?
Through the chair, I think we would be looking at complementary activities that might help activate some of our parks and open space. So they may be concessions for a cafe or coffee and some of those sorts of activities, rather than naming rights for public open space. That would be a bridge too far, I believe.
I would note that Mace has big dreams for car park charging on parks.
Fair enough. It just strikes me, Dean, I was just talking, the need for us to get some good political oversight on how the information goes out to the community is critical, because the question could be, do you want to pay for something you don't pay for now? Absolutely not. The other question is, do you think it's fair for, you know, netball to pay through the roof and rugby to pay nothing? So I think, you know, we just need to be a bit mindful of how we talk about this.
I think, Madam Chair, just through you, I think we've heard that very clearly, that the choices are relatively stark. If we're to meet the provision needs and future population demand and the changing nature of sport, as many of us get, all of us get older, we're changing the nature of the way we participate in sport, and we're becoming much more dominant in our community. We'll need different sorts of facilities that won't be in the form that are currently funded through development contributions. So I'm not saying this is about you, but we do need to think of alternative ways of how we fund those facilities. So it is a question about if we continue to meet that provision, how we fund that.
Thank you, Mace. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I've got a little bit of a problem with this because, I mean, sports fields and what happens on them and is core council business. We all know we've got to do it. But the report, when I read it, we don't know what we've currently got. It says the detailed sports facilities funding data is not currently available. We don't really know what we need until we hear back from the local board plans and they're signed off, as well as our own future-proofing about that. And then we kind of have to look at how we fund what we actually need and put that in the LTP. I also, I'm the first to look at other revenue streams, but at the end of the day, I think intrinsically, I agree with you, Mr. Wilcox. I just don't think that people are going to come back saying, yeah, we're happy to pay. So I think we need to be very careful what we say in this consultation document and kind of have a bit of a heads up on where we think it's going to go. Item number 37, you say you looked at other revenue streams, you considered other revenue streams, but that you discarded them due to practical reasons. What are those reasons? And I've got one more, but I'll just get, what are those? And then my last question is really around, you don't have to go out to the public by looking at potentially ways and means of looking for sponsorship without calling it the McDonald's Regional Park, but without looking at some sort of PPP to develop facilities. And so where is the work that we are doing, heads up, first, to actually assist communities develop facilities that actually don't necessarily have to be funded from those who play on or in them?
Through the chair, I'll answer the first question, which related to local boards. So my understanding is that at least 2 local boards for their advocacy into the long-term plan are seeking investment in indoor court facilities, which is currently can't be funded through development contributions. So that speaks to that point. I think if you look at, in response to question 2, attachment A in the report presents the list of options that were discounted reasonably quickly. So they included increasing debt and a range of other options that didn't align with the financial policy principles. And it escapes me what your third question was, sorry.
The way, I mean, we did make a commitment to local boards, didn't we, Councillor Clow, to look at ways that we could raise revenue from private, again, PPPs. And we looked at it, we did promise them a funding model that they could use, and we need to deliver on that. So I think that's something that definitely needs to be looked at.
Okay.
So through you, Madam Chair, we do have the regional facilities grant funding, which is limited though. So, and that's what we use.
This is how to put PPP together to deliver for upgraded or new sports facilities in our relative communities to minimise the cost to ratepayers, but do it a different way. We've made that commitment to our local boards right at the beginning.
Okay, so I can take that on board. We have a number of examples. I know you're aware of one of them at Liston Park through EOI. We've gone out with Rodney Local Board for a swimming pool and Walkworth, but they do come with a a commercial and private benefit.
You've got splash pads and there's the half basketball court arrangements.
So through the investment, through the investment approach, we've got a number of things like splash pads and the Spark 3-on-3 basketball courts across Auckland.
Yeah.
Work in progress.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Councillor Simpson. Councillor Quiggs.
Yeah, I do have some reservations about this, but going out to consultation, I think will tell us a lot. Certainly, I would agree to include a charge for boat ramps. I don't see any reason why boat ramps should be free of charge. And I know that, for example, at Half Moon Bay, it's probably considered to be the best or the quickest access to the Gulf in terms of fishing boats. So I don't see any reason why that, for example, we shouldn't charge. But I share Councillor Councillor Watson's concerns around some other charges that we may want to impose, and I'm particularly concerned around discouraging children whose parents are of limited need, or who have limited access to funding and so forth, to be able to play sport. And I would be concerned about that. The other point on paragraph 47 refers to non-sport related purposes. For example, an increase in the number of commuters that are using free parking at council sports facilities. I'm very aware of what happened at Lloyd Elsmore Park with that trial of a bus service from Lloyd Elsmore Park to Half Moon Bay, and it was patronised, I think, by about 5 or 6 people per week, and it was very quickly abandoned. So are there other areas where this is actually starting to prove such that we could actually gain a significant stream of revenue?
Through you, Madam Chair, there are some other areas such as around the Auckland domain, and then we've got Northcote domain as well, the Oniwa domain. And the Botanic Gardens, which you'll be familiar with as well.
To be fair though, Mace, it's hardly going to be a major source or even a minor source of revenue to this council for the number of people who park around the Auckland domain
and
or
the collection
some of the other areas that you've described. And currently that is patrolled by AT, I think. They have a limited parking on there already. Presumably, we would probably make more money from the enforcement of those, the time enforcement on those areas.
There's certainly benefits and disbenefits in all of those examples, Madam Chair.
So look, the things that I'm concerned about, Madam Chair, are the impact that it might have on low-income people in terms of their participation in sport, and chasing down every rabbit hole for a little bit of revenue, such as people parking around the domain, seems counterproductive, and it would be a waste of officers' time and our time, I would suggest, to actually try and get some revenue from that, when we probably already get some revenue from enforcement around that area.
Correct.
Thank you, Councillor. The advice I have from the senior officer is that it's actually far more lucrative than you may believe, and we will do that work and bring that back, as well as the work done on, there's a lot talked about by children being disadvantaged. They're currently disadvantaged depending on what sport they play. If you play on grass, you do it kind of for free. If you play it in the court, you pay through the nose. So let's not lose sight of that. I think we're just, the big picture is equity. I've got Councillor Hills, Member Blair, Mayor Goff, Councillor Clow and Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Hills.
Hey, through you, Madam Chair. I think, and probably to disagree with you there a little bit, that kids playing on grass in our community already clubs used to come to us on the local board saying that fees were too high for the kids. The money, so whether it's the clubs are charging anyway, and they're going to pass that to on to the families. And so we used to get clubs coming to us on the local board all the time saying that sports fees were already too high for those kids, uniform fees, and the list goes on and on. They were investigating how they fund boots for kids and stuff, and that's on the North Shore, which is apparently a place with money. I have some concerns that this is business as usual stuff, and I feel concerned that where does it stop? The other thing is that the North Shore, we have different things are funded differently. One of our soccer football clubs, they raised money for the lights. They paid half for the lights in one of our parks. So then, is that fair? So they raised that money themselves and got the money. You got the netball courts down there who don't receive a dollar in funding unless they apply for it. They don't get operational funding. Yet other netball courts around the city get up to $150,000 a year. So once again, I feel like if we put this out on a, this is for everyone, this is standardisation kind of thing, it's not actually, because there's already discrepancies. And if we're going to do this kind of stuff, then we need to start from afresh somehow and make some hard decisions. But I do get concerned that, you know, we send this out, it's not exactly clear how much things will be. We know it's going to get passed on to families and kids, but also we're looking at this as a silo. You know, it even says in, or someone's comment was that, you know, you're paying for this even if you don't play on sport. Well, it's sort of that whole village to raise a family kind of thing. We want, or in my opinion, I want kids in my community to play sport because it's healthy, it keeps them busy, it affects a whole lot of other social issues around the community that affect us all. It's not just about if you and your kids go and play on that sports field. And how do we manage it? Are we going to go and chase down the casual club that comes on every Wednesday night and does touch, or, you know, but they're there during the time that someone else is playing? I mean, I know it's in there and I'm being a little bit extreme, but I do wonder how this is going to fare. And I also, you know, it's as a political thing, you know, people are complaining, you know, there were people who wanted 2% rates and other things, you know, not to have other funding streams, and this is the problem. This is what's going to keep happening if we keep rates at a level. So we'll start, you know, people might be happy with us for 2.5 or whatever now, but yeah, I'm concerned that suddenly we start charging everyone for everything separately, and then it's a pointless exercise. So yeah, that's not, I mean, probably the question, so there's a lot of comments, but the question is, how do we get to a place where it's obvious what people are being charged, and it's obvious also the issues around places which have already raised their own money for basically public assets because of these issues, and now then we're going to recharge them again. Yeah.
Question.
Just through the chair, I suppose one thing we would state that this is to consult within a sports investment plan that is a 10 to 20 year document. This decision is to signal to the community that you will be using a wider range of tools than we currently use, but each individual decision you make is a financial policy often and is subject to, then we can go very specific data and understand that quite specifically before you make the decision on the actual instrument. So this decision does not give any right to anyone to charge for anything that's not currently being charged for now. It's indicating to the public over the next 10 to 20 years, to meet the demands of growth, you will see us using an increasing number of instruments which are based on fees and charges, rents, revenue and targeted rates. So it's signalling the tool, the investment tools you'll use. It is not the actual individual investment decisions. So then each investment decision needs to come back, and that's when sometimes it's much easier for us to figure out the details. I suppose there's one bit of an issue that we all know we have is just like we don't know how many reserves our parks are, it is sometimes very difficult for us to climb inside everything council has from a legacy point of view and understand it fully. So even when we do deep dives, we generally, it either takes us years or we even have to generalise within the deep dives because you have to unpick every single individual arrangement often to find out the variety of methods that was used in the past, and there are a lot of those arrangements.
So we will or we may?
Okay.
We may.
So let's just finish the last few speakers. Member Blair.
Oh, okay, I'll be quick. Just the impacts on poorer communities with user pays. I came from humble beginnings, and a lot of people around this table did too. And having access to the rugby club, the importance of all the mums and dads working behind the scenes to develop a community was really critical towards Helensville and that community, along with the other sports that are there. So will your consultation really consider the effects of user pays on poorer communities? And just a general comment around, I want to support private investors coming into local community developing local community facilities. I've got experience in that with the Okahu Bay Bowls Club, where I'm on the tribal directorship there, where we're trying to invest in that facility, but we're coming up against barriers towards doing that. So I want to see whether you can help us make that a smoother transition for private investors to invest in community facilities. So that's my quick response.
In relation to your first question, so we have been providing recent reports to this committee about the impact fees and charges can have on specific communities and how it can impact a reduction in their participation in the sport they were participating in previously. So we are very aware of that, and we alerted the committee to that on paragraph 49. Many user fees and charges have unexpected consequences, and not just on poorer communities but on other communities as well, and that's one of the things we'll always have to keep testing and readjusting when you're looking at fees and charges. In terms of your second question, I know that that's very similar to Councillor Simpson's. I was wondering, would people prefer that we did an options analysis and added a bullet point on what we're consulting on, which would be including increased look at public-private partnerships in these facilities? But we'd have to do the analysis so that that was included for the public when we went to consultation, and we could add a bullet point through you, the Chair, if that was appropriate, that specifically recognises a tool, an investment tool will be public-private partnerships.
Well, Madam Chair, if I could just jump in here. Yeah. Part of the reason I wanted to speak was to actually highlight the fact that the local boards were upset about some of the local boards were upset over the disestablishment of the partnerships.
Funding, yes.
Yeah, and that really has been quite a raw point. And I was actually going to ask you about whether in this kind of permissive group of clauses here, whether that would actually allow for, but I think it would be better to have it as a specific, Madam Chair, so if I'd be happy for that to be incorporated. The Facilities Partnership Fund got a lot of new initiatives off the ground, and I think that that's the type of thing that Councillor Simpson and others are alluding to, and I understood that we're actually working our way back towards such a fund, but we shouldn't just assume, maybe we can be specific.
Through the Chair, that was certainly an issue that was raised during the initial consultation. Local boards were pretty much united in their voice around that, so that's something that we are investigating as part of the...
Why don't we just pop that in as another bullet point and just be clear that that's what we'd like in there?
So typically, Madam Chair, that partnerships fund leveraged 7 times the investment from the fund.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Sounds like
silly to get rid of it.
Why don't we do that then? Margoff.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I don't think there's an elected representative around this table that doesn't think that this is a pretty challenging exercise. A long life in politics tells me that if you go out and say we're going to charge your kids to play on the sports ground, they're not going to embrace you and say you're a kind, warm-hearted, good representative. They're going to say, what is in your head? Having said that, you've got a real challenge. We've all got a real challenge. And what we've got to do is be really specific about how we go about this exercise. One of the things is to set bottom lines. If there's anybody here that thinks that going out and trying to sell a charge that is likely to discourage participation in sport or likely to disadvantage an already disadvantaged community, then I think you've got it wrong. Neither of those things will work, so there has to be some bottom lines in it. Having said that, I think the Chair has quite properly pointed out the anomalies in the existing system, and that's unfair. And you've quite properly pointed out in this paper that if we do nothing, actually nothing gets provided. So, you know, we might have to bite a bullet, but let's do it in a way that isn't on a hiding to nothing, because if you bite the bullet, crack the teeth, and you've still got nothing to chew on, you haven't got very far. One thing that fascinated me in your report was section 46, where you say only 12% of Auckland's sport and recreation expenditure is funded by user fees and charges. This compares to an average of 32% across other local authorities. That quite surprised me. I'd kind of like to see some analysis of how other local authorities are coping with this. That needs exploring. I concur with people who talk about whether we can get sponsorship, philanthropic interest, PPPs. That would be good. For those that think we can increase the gambling machines, forget it. We've got a sinking lid policy and we should stick with it. We're not going to solve our problems by creating further social problems. But I think in the end, for the consultation exercise to work, this has to share our problem with the wider community, be honest and open and transparent about the problem, and then put forward a range of key options. Because if you only put forward options that say, we're going to take more money out of your pocket from your kids, the consultation, we might as well not do it, because we know what the response back will be. But a problem shared is a problem that we might be able to get, I'm thinking optimistically, be able to get some consensus around. So I think coming back to us with how you want to present that is really important. Look, a tough problem, we need to address it. If we do it badly, it'll be 1 step forward and 10 steps back. So if we're going to do it, let's try and get it right.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We've got 3 speakers left. I just wanted to capture something, and I can't remember who asked for it. It might have been Councillor Watson. The facilities, our sports facilities update. The Mayor's quite right. This will be a hard ask. How was it, Councillor Walker? If we're clear with our community about what we want to buy for them on their behalf over the next 20 years and for their children, and to increase opportunities for participation, then this conversation makes sense. If this is just seen as yet another revenue grab by council, it won't make sense. So I think we need to put it really carefully in that context. So let's go to Councillor Clow, Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Watson, and then I hope we might be done. Councillor Clow.
Well, there's been so many comments when I thought it was questions. I have a question now to
it's
start
just
off with.
everything, Councillor.
I have a question. So, a couple of years ago we did, I remember doing quite a bit with Callum Penrose and a few others, where we went around a whole lot of sports clubs and various areas to ask them what the issues were. And one very practical thing was, yes, Councillor Fletcher, one very practical thing was, and I think even including Renata's club at the bowling club, he's just leaving though, he's not listening, they even came up with a suggestion like many others, that why can't they put bigger signs out in their parks in order to advertise their clubs now and advertise anything else. And now, did we ever do anything about that? That's the question, because that was a very practical bottom line thing done from those many workshops around the city at clubs, and that was a very simple thing that they wanted to do. And I know that bowling club there up at Oraki couldn't actually put a sign out to say they were there, or a sign of any significance anyway. So that was a question, and clearly, Mace, you're writing it down because there's no answer at this stage. I was actually opposed to all of this, but I'm more than happy with the consultation thing, because this is a hornet's nest. You're opening up you're really opening something up here, because it's only 2 years ago that we rationalised the fields, where Auckland City fields clubs were paying for 5 years in the Super City, and we actually took that inequity out and made it so that it was neutral. Now we're looking at something else. Councillor Casey wanted to know just about club income, and I can say, because I wear a Class 4 gaming national hat and with the licensing trust, but so I see a lot of profit and loss accounts and trading accounts and the balance sheets. So membership fees are pretty well often the highest thing. However, that's not the case with rugby league or netball. So they're basically blue-collar sports in many ways. Bars and bistro is the next one, but that's declining. And then gambling is declining with all of them. There's very few sports clubs now have their own gaming machines. Bowling clubs do, but that's a dying form of sport anyway. But they do rely on gambling. So just to reflect, and we've had a couple of discussions today, but bar bistros dropping, drink drive, we're talking about smoking, which affects people who say, right, I'm going to stay home and smoke and drink and all that sort of stuff. It all starts to affect. Class 4 gaming is going down regards, and that's we've got sinking lid, which I'm happy with, but at the same time we've got a hell of a lot more pokies going into the Sky City, which doesn't distribute diddly squeak, to be quite honest. And a big thing that Class 4 gaming is the clamping down on salaries for club administrators. But there's a decline in volunteers in most clubs, and therefore the clubs are having to hire people to do what volunteers used to do. There's all sorts of pressures, and there's been 4 or 5, 6 people that have all talked about what the new fees would do, especially for grass and field facilities, because those clubs that would get most affected there are rugby, league and netball. I know it's association, but they don't pay their... Football people tend to pay their fees, but because it's more of a middle-class white sport comparatively, but certainly league and rugby, people just, the income sources for those clubs is incredibly narrow and declining. So it is, they can't turn to membership, and all I just say when it comes to green fields, remember green fields or playing fields are all in parks. Now, parks are a recreational park that anyone can wander on at any time, and we're looking at maybe, whacking up fees for, and I know there's an inequity between buildings and green fields, but you've got green fields, playing fields that are in parks, so therefore everyone else can walk around on them, and that we're going to whack any clubs that are trying to keep people fit and healthy and off the streets. So I just think it's real hoardness, yes, but we're consulting, and I think it would be a very interesting consultation on that one.
How far you get.
But I did want to say one more thing. It was a note right at the start. So also, councillors, remember, we can increase rates. You don't have to have 2.5% or 2%. You can also sell land. You can look at selling some parks in order to and we target that money to be reinvested in other parks instead of going into the consolidated fund. But we have time and time again little pocket parks. We want to add a new one here. We won't sell one here or whatever. But there are other ways of doing it where we can actually, maybe we've got to look at those sorts of things. And I won't even get onto regional parks because there's no money for regional parks. But if you want to be looking at trying to buy new regional parks, I don't know where you're going to find money other than by selling some land.
Right.
So are you saying
There
we
I-
don't
I-
consult?
Point of order, Madam
hang on,
Chair.
Hang on.
Point of order.
I hope it's a genuine
It
point of
is.
order, councillor.
Normally, the councillor to my right declares a conflict of interest before any involvement in Class 4 gambling discussions. He didn't do so today, and he engaged.
I was listening
it's
carefully
marginal.
as someone...
not
Hang on.
Marginal.
Councillor, shush. I listened very carefully. Councillor, I listened very carefully as someone who's also involved in gambling, and I listened very carefully for any crossover. I didn't hear it. Councillor Fletcher.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. One of the problems we have is with a 3-year electoral term where we start a body of work and then we don't necessarily have the ability to see it through. And so I want to acknowledge Mace and some of the team that are here for some of the work, and Councillor Clough has highlighted parts of that work that was started in the last term, and Councillor Walker also in terms of trying to understand the portfolio of playing fields and spaces and that we have. But if we're going to be aspirational, and I think to a degree we're starting part of the conversation that should be taking place with the Auckland Plan refresh, that this is part of the wellness that people like me want to talk about, that we should be creating an environment where every person, whether they be aged 90 or whether they be aged 9 months or 9, has the ability to participate in some kind of sports in some kind of way. And it's the beginning of the dialogue around how we get some equity in being able to achieve that. Now, we're giving you, with this today, some very big scope in terms of what you go out to consult with, and that is alarming. All of the points that have been made about the concerns over the volunteer sector, what we know that we're having fewer and fewer volunteers, we load them up with fundraising, we load them up with bureaucracy, we load them up with health and safety issues, and of course they run a mile. So the last thing we want to do is scare off all the volunteers, and maybe that should be a specific bullet point, understanding club membership and volunteers and taking that into account with our consultation. But we have to do some things differently, and if we are going to have those playing spaces for all Aucklanders to really enjoy, we are going to have to be a little bit more creative about the way we go about it. The big problem, as we know, is not the capex always, it's the opex on our parks. And one of the things that I think that Councillor Holst, as the chair of this committee, is probably going to lead us in, and that is that the opportunity of the way that we can actually, in a sustainable way, convert some of that green space into being financially sustainable, whether it's having bike hire concessions in our parkways, whether it's all of the little initiatives that are actually going to go a long way towards meeting the operational expenditure that is the killer in terms of the green space. So Councillor Simpson is quite right to say parks and playing fields are core activity. Yes, they are core activity for council, and we shouldn't shy away from that. It's probably one of the major roles that we will ever do in terms of the work of Auckland Council. However, core activity doesn't mean to say we have to fund every single dollar of it. It means we have to facilitate it. We can play a different role going forward. So I'm really in favour of the work that we are looking at here. I hope that the consultation, it's just the beginning of the discussion. The opportunity there for public misunderstanding has been well scoped. So, Madam Chair, I wonder whether you would think about adding that bullet point under A, looking at declining club membership and the role of volunteers being a factor that our officers do have to take into account on this. But it is finally going to be looking out from now at getting some equity into the situation in that everybody can participate in sports and everybody can have access to it. So it's a balancing act, and I think it's about trying to find that sweet spot between accessibility and not scaring off all the volunteers, but actually growing the amount of playing spaces that we have. And part of that partnership is also going to be working increasingly with the Ministry of Education. We have a lot of green space out there, but we saw it with the work that we did from the predecessor to this committee and identifying the cycleway. You know, that is where that body of work came that we all now proudly claim, you know, as the what is it called, pathways, cycleways, or whatever it's been renamed these days. But the same sort of thing can actually be achieved working with all of the agencies in terms of opening up facilities. But it will be different, and we are going to have a discussion about regional parks. We are going to have to do some of these things, even if it is an anathema to the Chair of Finance at the moment. We want to leave a legacy. I think this council needs to leave a legacy of creating those playing spaces, of creating the sort of parks that we need for the future. And business as usual won't work. I think this is a good stepping stone towards what a future might be. But could I please encourage those officers who are working on this to go and talk to those that are charged with the Auckland Plan refresh and get it through to them that this is core council work. This is about what we need to be doing to achieve the sort of health goals, if nothing else, looking into the future. So I commend these recommendations to you, declining membership and the role of volunteers. Yes, thank you very much for the adoption, inclusion of that, and I hope we can all adopt it.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. We may have to move an extension of time for 15 minutes because we still have a range of speakers, because I have let everyone have a say, and I apologise if that's been irritating, but it has seemed like a really important thing to do. I'm going to take the unusual step of asking the staff, when we come to putting the consultation package together and the information together, that we actually have a workshop or join it on to a time when we're all together, because I do want to get that right. And I know there's strong feelings, and councillors have taken the time to express them, and I really respect that. What I hope is that we don't skew this discussion with our community by, sort of going off to defend our local rugby club or our own personal beliefs. I think we can actually have a really, really good discussion with our community, exactly as Councillor Fletcher is the experienced, previous chair of parks. This is a really big discussion that we are either going to get right here and head off in the right level of discussion with our community, or it's going to be a small, over-politicised, stone that sinks away from view, buried in the back pages of the Herald. So, let's actually start this with kind of good heart and from a good place. So we've got Councillor Watson, Councillor Quacks, Councillor Casey, Councillor Simpson. I'll move that we extend for 10 minutes.
I'll second that.
That's probably enough. Thank you. Seconded, Councillor Clow. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Councillor Watson.
Yep, thank you. One very quick point, Madam Chair, and that was just simply to say that a couple of years ago, the government altered the development contributions regime to take out, I think, the ability to levy for community halls and perhaps swimming pools. There might have been something else. At the time, we put a submission in saying that would cost us $480 million, I think, over the next 10 years. So I guess my simple point is, if they can take it out, surely they can put it back in and perhaps cover some of the areas. So I'll definitely be looking very closely at that development contributions. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
sorry,
you.
it's a bit hard to listen to two
Finished.
things at once. You're okay,
Yep.
Councillor Watson? He's good? Okay, we're just are trying to avoid now putting in too many dot points and putting the whole thing in a rather strange space. So we're going to change it from declining membership to arresting membership. But please, let's not add any more dot points. Councillor Quacks.
Madam Chair, I wonder if one of the things that we could look closely at was the rent that we charge for community facilities. I noticed that we charge, in most cases, we seem just to charge $1 when our own costs are nearly $4,000 as administration. I suspect that might be one way that and a fairly palatable way of actually, I think people would certainly understand, and it's not bringing the cost back to the individual. So I think that might be one way that we could look at raising some revenue, and I know that will be considered, but some of these things I find difficult to deal with, given the fact that we are the sole suppliers of sports facilities in most cases. This is our core business, more than some of the other things that we do. And I think anybody around here knows that I'm an advocate and certainly somebody who proposes user pays on most occasions where we can. But in this particular instance, there is no other supplier of sports facilities in a meaningful way that can be accessed by everybody. And I'm still struggling about whether I'm actually going to vote for this.
You can join me.
Okay. Yep. All right, no, hear the concern. Councillor Casey.
No, I'm done.
Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to suggest that we add to potentially fund. So we're going out to consult, but are we actually saying we're consulting because we actually are looking to increase funding through these methods, or that we potentially are? If we add the word agree to consult on expansion of current revenue streams to potentially increase funding, there is still the option that we won't do that.
But we may sell some sports fields or put the rates up.
Well, I mean, Councillor Clow, as Chair of Finance, did give some options. So I'm just saying, if you don't, it's not you're either saying we're going out to consult to fund this in a different way, or you're going out to consult to potentially. And I think you've got to give those options. The status quo is doing what we're doing, and as a result, but if you don't put the word potentially, you're taking people to a point without giving them a choice.
Done. Let's put the recommendation. I think that's good. I think we might have got to where we need to get.
Madam Chair,
Done.
Madam Chair, the suggestions of Councillor Clow was quite proper in that he was trying to draw attention to the arresting the declining membership, and so we've actually got some words there that Tam is just going to put up that I think perhaps might better reflect that. So we've got understanding and responding to declining club membership should be, and the importance of the role of volunteers.
Okay, so we're going to consult on that. Because if you read it in its rawest term, we're going to consult on introducing new, generating revenues, investigating public and understanding. So we're going to ask people why they're declining in membership. It's just a bit of an odd, I kind of see,
Trying to make the linkage.
you know, why we, it's almost like it's a subset. I think it's maybe B. I think it's B. It's just a separate, it's a separate thing. We need to, we need to understand and respond to declining club membership. C, note the potential to consider the increase in the,
All I wouldn't
think
want to
we've
see
split it
is
out.
that work being replicated where that work is already done, and what we're trying to do is factor it in. Madam Chair, I wonder, I suggested to you that perhaps a small working party could be undertaken. We've got people like Councillor Watson here and others who've been really passionate about this, whether they could scrutinise this before it comes back to the workshop, that you could have a small subgroup that could look at this and wordsmith it, so that the consultation can have taken into account all of these things.
I think if we have maybe 3 councillors at the moment, or, you know, maybe Councillor Watson, I'm random now, Councillor Watson, yourself, Councillor Simpson, anyone from this side, a keen person, Councillor Walker. We can just look at the wording, we can sense check it for the political sense checking, and we can get off hopefully on a foot that says we're, you know, we're genuinely going out with the right information to
Councillor
talk to
Quacks,
people.
I think, would be a very good person too.
You can tell him that, Councillor Fletcher, I don't think he's listening.
Note that to the chair.
Councillor Quacks has just been nominated to be part of this group. Okay.
All
right. You talk to Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Quacks.
Through the chair to note that
I'll second that.
the reference group will be providing input in regards to the recommendation though, not trying to change.
No. I think just to settle everyone down again, given the discussion, you know, the quite, I think, incredibly useful discussion. That's why we're there. We are representatives of our community, so we're raising the stuff that is going to be of concern to our community. This is a chance for us to get together as a group of community representatives and say, the information makes sense, the way that we're going to consult makes sense, and the material is readable, understandable, and not alarming, and going to go out and have a genuine consultation and discussion with our peeps. I'm going to put that recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye. Against?
No.
Carried. Councillor Walker. Okay.
My vote recorded again.
But we still want you on the group.
Working party.
He's on.
Think of it.
That's okay.
I think we've now officially reached the point where we're tired. Can I just?
I want a division,
Can I just really thank the committee? This has been a hell of a day, and you've hung in there, you've contributed incredibly well and wisely, and I think you're awesome. To our staff, thank you.
I'll
Well
move
done.
15, I'll move